Hello, I'm Robin Gill, and this is the West Block. Politics, perspective, and players. Australia has announced it is cancelling its extradition treaty with Hong Kong, a move the Canadian government has made as well. But Australia, like Britain, went one step further, announcing it would make it easier for Hong Kong residents to stay in Australia. Joining us to talk more about the growing pushback against Beijing is Kevin Rudd. He was Australia's Prime Minister from 2007 to 2010, and then again in 2013. Mr. Rudd is now a leading international voice on China. He joins us from Sydney, Australia. Mr. Rudd, how would you describe the relationship between Australia and China, and how do you see this playing out?
Look, structurally, what's happening because of China's more assertive foreign policy around the world is that it's not just Canada that's singled out, it's not just Australia that's singled out. Frankly, it's many, many democracies around the world. If we were having this discussion in Sweden at the moment, we'd have a similar conversation. So what has changed structurally is that China is now pushing out with a much more assertive foreign policy, a much more strident foreign policy across the board. And as a result, we all find ourselves with similar degrees of structural difficulty.
Last week, Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs warned Australians living in China or planning to travel there that they could arbitrarily be detained. Do you think China will start doing this?
Well, everyone in the world is very mindful of your Canadian Michaels, both of them. And I follow this case very closely. I'm a student of China. I speak Chinese. I've lived in Beijing before ever going into political office. And so I'm very mindful of the circumstances of these two individuals. And it now being, what, a year and a half or more down the track, this is a salutary warning, I think, to all Western democracies about crossing swords with China on core questions of their national interests. So therefore, while I'm not privy to the intelligence community because I'm out of office and what it's saying, there are prudent levels of concern now on the part of many countries about their nationals' well-being within China, either as tourists, as travellers, as students, or as business people. And the sooner we can see the release of the two Michaels, better for them, better for Canada, better for the world.
China is Australia's largest trading partner, and Beijing has already threatened economic retaliation in light of the response to its clampdown on Hong Kong. Given China's economic dominance, what should Canada's response be, in your view, when it comes to responding to this?
Well, the truth of the matter is, I think, observing from afar, the Trudeau government has done practically all it can. You see, ultimately, this boils down to the state of the US-China relationship. You guys in Canada have become the meat in the geopolitical sandwich between the two of them. And because of that, these two individuals have now been incarcerated. Of course, this all goes back to the Madam Meng matter and Huawei and her father, Ren Zhengfei, and the entire elite structure of Chinese domestic politics. And so on your core question is how is this unblocked? Frankly, the action lies with the US judicial authorities. And my argument would simply be this. Look, on the matter which Madam Meng is currently arraigned for, which deals with ultimately the implementation of US unilateral sanctions against Iran, and whether Huawei or one of its subsidiaries has violated those sanctions and been transparent with its financial institutions that it's dealing with about that. If the United States is going to continue to treat this as a criminal matter, then guess what? The extradition procedures with Canada will continue to unfold. Whereas wisdom may lie in the United States doing what I believe it's done in similar cases in the past, which is to regard this not as a criminal matter, but as a civil matter. And therefore, if it's resolved as a civil matter before the courts, then it would result in some very large fine being administered to the corporation concerned. Now, I'm not fully familiar with the case law here, but I understand that there are precedents for the way in which this can be handled. So the ball lies in the US DOJ's court.
As you know, China detained and charged two Canadians, Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig, with espionage. Our Prime Minister says this is hostage diplomacy in response to the arrest of Meng Wanzhou here in Vancouver. What can Canada do to free the two Michaels?
Well, I don't believe that's possible under Canadian law. You Canadians, like we Australians, believe in something old-fashioned called the rule of law. We actually believe in the integrity of our long-standing extradition treaties, and therefore we're obliged to operate under the terms of the law. But the extradition matter itself in Canada concerning Madam Meng, and therefore the retaliatory actions taken in relation to the two Michaels, ultimately proceeds from a discretionary decision by the United States Department of Justice. And frankly, I think the Trump administration has some questions to answer as to how they have handled this themselves.
China watchers have pointed out that what Beijing fears the most is an anti-China coalition. What more do you think Australia and other allies of Canada can do to help free the two Michaels?
Look, I'm confident that those channels have been well and truly deployed by the government of Canada with its friends and allies around the world, and it's not appropriate to comment on that in a public program. All I'm saying is that if you strip all those questions away and go back to its absolute core, this is a discretionary decision by the US Department of Justice to act in a particular manner in a criminal prosecution in a case which I believe could be handled as a civil matter, as I believe the United States has done in similar cases in the past, and administer a fine to Huawei or its subsidiaries.
Do you think if Western nations, including Canada, Australia, the US, take a united front on China, this will change Beijing's behavior?
Well, the bottom line is, as I said before in our interview, China has become much more assertive in its foreign policy under Xi Jinping. We can trace the origins of that back to about the end of 2013, and it's been a fairly clear trajectory ever since then. Part of that's to do with the United States itself, but part of it also impacts upon other Asian and Western democracies. So I believe the common challenge for all of us is to be very clear about our principles. And what I've argued to the Australian government since I've left office is I would say to other governments around the world, one, be very clear that we are all liberal democracies and we stand up for universal human rights. That's who we are. Number two, many of us are allies of the United States, and that's not about to change anytime soon. Three, we would like to prosecute a mutually beneficial economic relationship with you and China. Four, we'd like to work with you collaboratively in the institutions of global governance, like on climate change through the G20 and elsewhere, and on pandemic management. But five, if China continues to push hard against middle powers like Canada, Australia, and others in the European Union and others in Asia, then action creates reaction, and you'll then find automatically other countries beginning to coalesce together and develop a common strategy for dealing with these levels of Chinese pressure.
Mr. Rudd, thank you so much for your time.
Good to be with you.
That is all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us. For the West Block, I'm Robin Gill.